Well, today we're not just looking at podcasts, but podcasting in Africa. Well, in case you didn't know, there is a day set aside to celebrate Africa podcasts, and it was launched on the 12th of February 2021 to take place every year. And this was an initiative by Josephine Karianjai and Melissa Mbuga, the co-founders of Africa Podfest. The day is set aside to celebrate and appreciate the continent's podcasting industry. Now here, podcasters, listeners, and the whole audio community get together to recognize the growth and the accomplishments of the podcasting industry in Africa. If they had told you some years ago that podcasting will be a thing, you definitely doubt it. But hashtag Africa Podcast Day also offers online and physical shared space for the continent's podcasters to exchange knowledge and also interact with both African and international partners. That said, joining me on this conversation today, I have the honor of introducing, first of all, with me in the studio, Aisha Afonja, the project manager, Hey X Media, Nigeria. I hope I got that right.
X Media.
X Media. Okay, that was close. Well, not so close. But anyways, Aisha Afonja is the project manager of X Media in Nigeria. Thank you, Aisha, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. And also, I have joining me Noeline Tracy Kabale, communication executive in Kampala, Uganda. Thank you, Noeline, for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And finally, last but not the least, we have Njeri Gikonyo, a journalist in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you, Njeri, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I see that it's an all-women affair today. Somehow I'm sort of proud, but I don't want to rub it in. So anyways, I'm glad to have you ladies join me on the show today. So we're talking about podcasts and podcasting, especially in Africa. So I'm going to first start off by asking, Aisha, I'll start with you. What are podcasts and how did it become so viral in Africa?
We actually know that in Africa this day, Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya, to start with, are actually growing very fast when it comes to podcasting. And people are actually hearing their opinions and how they feel about the society. It could be a personal issue, and people are actually learning from their experiences so far. And podcasting in Nigeria is something that I think is fast growing, and people are learning day by day.
Definitely. Noeline, do you want to chip in something to that? What do you think podcasting is?
Podcasting is a platform where so many youths, millennials, are using to share out their stories, to tell their stories, to tell what is happening to them, or to share out information. It's now a good that enables them to give opinion about so many things. And here in Uganda, it's one of the platforms that youths are using to express themselves and to share their individual personal stories. Yeah.
All right, and Jerry, your thoughts on what podcasting is?
I think podcasting is a new wave citizen journalism where we are not only allowed to spread news, that's hard news, but also opinions on culture and social affairs that affect the country, or even maybe that are close to the person that's doing the podcast. I feel like they've put a personal spin to journalism because you can narrate what feels important to you.
Okay, still staying with you, Njeri, how do you think podcasts became so viral in Africa? Now, in my opinion, I know that I started seeing a lot of podcasts and podcasters during the COVID-19 period, and that was when people were working from home. A lot of people wanted to get themselves busy by doing one thing or another, and so some people came up with the idea, oh, you know what, let's have a sit down and tell all session from the comfort of our homes and just have people converse and talk about these issues. So I know that from the COVID-19 era, it became more popular. But how do you think it became viral in Africa?
I agree with you, actually, with the physical restraints on seeing each other physically. With COVID-19, it became imperative for us to find a way to communicate because we're human and our backbone is communication. So with podcasts that give us the leeway to have conversations without being in the same room, that had the exact opportunity to blow up and kind of bring us together and remind us that even if we feel alone in our houses, we really aren't, you know. There's always the person whispering in your ear in a podcast. It
Right.
brought a sense of comfort. Yeah.
Well, very well said. Noeline, I would also like for us to talk about how there are so many different kinds of podcasts. I mean, there are the educative podcasts, but I think the major ones and these are the ones that really concern a lot of citizens, are the podcasts where there are no experts. People just come and air their views, say their opinions. And sometimes the kind of messages you're getting from it, or the kind of information you're getting from it, you're wondering, like, what are they saying? Don't they have home trainings and things like that? So what do you make of these podcasts?
As much as podcasts give everyone the freedom to express themselves, we have so many uncensored podcasts. And due to the uncensorship, we are having a lot of wrong information going out. Putting the educative, even you'll find that the educative podcasts are not well researched. Someone will just wake up, now I'm a podcaster, I have something to talk about, I have something to put forward, and they'll just say what they feel they have to say. And it's an individual. Usually these podcasts come from an individual opinion, not a general opinion. So they're very biased. Most of the podcasts are uncensored and very opinionated.
Anyways, talking about opinionated, this is a youth-based show, and we usually like to get the opinions of people across the globe. So we enter into the streets and get the opinions of youths across Africa and hear what they have to say about the certain topic, in this case, podcast. So let's take a look at these youths and what they have to say, and then we'll be right back to talk about it in the back end.
Well, one of my advantages, or one of the advantages I see in podcasting, is the fact that you could give out your voice to the world. You can allow the world connect with you through your voice and make them understand that whatever it is they're going through, they are never alone in those situations. But then when it comes to the disadvantage, well, I would say, first of all, it's always so difficult to stay consistent. It's always so difficult to build the ideas. And then another problem is, how do I know if my audience are really engaging with me? How do I know if they are still connected? And how do I even know if they are getting to the right places? How to get the audience now.
A lot of information is being shared, and there's no regulation for it. So a lot of fake information, information based on personal opinions and backgrounds, and information that may not even be researched are being shared. And what that causes is that many vulnerable people will take these opinions in without filtering or sifting them. But on the brighter side, knowledge is never too much. Knowledge is never too much to be shared. So I think most people should just, take whatever is shared on social media, on the podcast, with a pinch of salt, and verify and do their research.
One of the disadvantages of a podcast is that at times the people who appear on these podcasts end up airing out views that are extreme. So, but mostly the advantages of a podcast outweigh the disadvantages. Then about people who can be hosted on a podcast, I would love to believe that if a person is to host someone on a podcast, they have to look at their specialty.
The main purpose of podcasts is to raise awareness among people, message on important issues and topics delivered to people through podcasting or video blogging. So I'd like to talk about a few disadvantages. We have quite a number of podcasters out there, spreading wrong information, and this is really affecting our society. One of it is depression. Imagine there was a time I listened to a podcast, I won't like to mention the name of a lady in a podcast, saying that keeping your virginity, it's a taboo, it's wrong. I mean, you don't have to convince people to keep their virginity or not. It's left to them to decide what they want to do with their life. But you, saying it is wrong, and if a young lady or a young guy out there that's supposed to keep themselves to some time before they can do the next thing, and find themselves doing things that are not at that age, is because of the wrong information that you just spread.
Well, spot on ideas by the youth, if I must say. Now, there were so many things that I was able to pick from what they said, but I'll just like for us to discuss a little with my guest in the house. And I'm going to start with you, Aisha. Now, the last person who spoke was talking about a podcast where a lady said, your virginity is not a flex, right? It's not a big deal. If you have it, you have it. If you don't have it, you don't make noise about it. And that really sparked a lot of controversy online. And in relations to that as well, I think the second to the last, well, the person who spoke said that most times we have to learn to take what people say with a pinch of salt, especially when the person is not an expert. But then comparing it to the level of vulnerability that so many people have, because if you had seen that podcast, I took my time to see that podcast and I went through the comment section, and boy, you needed to see how much support she got for what she said by young girls, 19, 18, 17. So how do we balance this up? These are young girls coming up and hearing another small girl talking about how virginity is not a flex. So how do we take it with a pinch of salt when almost everyone is vulnerable to what they hear?
Things like that shouldn't be taken with a pinch of salt. You know, when there are no regulations or agencies guiding a particular platform, you get to see stuff like that. They are not professional enough, you know, just like one of the people said that, okay, podcasts are growing during COVID-19. People just want to express their feeling. When you're bored, you want to say something to people. And then, since there are no regulations, there's no way you can cop some certain things. You don't know what to say, how to say it. They are not professionals. So we need to get an agency, a body to guide these people. And don't be surprised. You can see people, girls with age of probably 12, 13, 14, right there doing their podcast. No guideline, no restrictions, you know. And these are the things that are actually affecting the society when you can't know what to say, how to say it, and the right platform to share it.
Very true. I mean, still talking about regulations, Noeline, is it not risky that these podcasters have no rules whatsoever binding them? People can just wake up, just like Aisha just said, that people can just wake up because you feel bored, you want to talk, and you want people to listen to you. And then there's this trending word now that people use, that's my truth. So a lot of people expect you to conform to their ideas, their opinions, because that's what they are thinking. So is it not risky that we have a lot of people speaking without rules, without regulation, and, you know, like what they say about where there are no rules, there are no sins. So what should be done?
I think, like, unlike traditional media, here podcast is current media. It's advanced media that has no censorship. It has no control. There is no one following it up. It's an individual basis. So I feel like we need to preach more about podcasts. We need to preach more to podcasters so that they can get to know what they're addressing and who they're addressing, because this is information that is put out on the internet. Anyone can access it, whether an 18, a 19, or below that. So we just need to talk to podcasters, because as much as we cannot control who is accessing it, we can at least control what is going out. So as podcasters already in the podcast businesses, we need to talk to our fellow podcasters so that they know this whole uncensorship. How do you censor yourself individually? Like in my country, we have censorship regulations, but they don't work on podcasts. It's more of working on TV, radio,
media,
and online blogs. Yes. So we need to come up with self-censorship, and also government should also get to know that we have new media coming up, so they should incorporate this new media into the already existing regulations so that we can control it.
You know, Noeline, you mentioned that as much as we can't control those who access these things, we can control what the content is. And that will move me to ask an Njeri this. Is it not also risky that we cannot control the age range of those who access this podcast? I mean, look at little girls listening to those kind of things and getting ideas in their heads that, oh, really, this thing isn't that big of a deal. And then they go on with their lives thinking that what this 22, 21-year-old just said is what I will shape my life after. So is it not risky that these has also began to affect the younger generation coming after? Because in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, the people who are conforming to these ideas, there's no telling how dangerous it will be when they grow up and become experts in those fields and are now pouring the same idea onto the younger generation. So it will become a never-ending cycle. So how do we stop that? Do we now start telling them, creating awareness that it's not everything you hear online that you believe? Just go back to your drawing board, whatever it is your parents teach you. Because now every child has two teachers, their parents and then social media. So it's a very, very dangerous world we're living in now. What do you think about that?
Actually, you're right, because half of these podcasts that I listen to, and I am pretty young, and even though I work in a media house, I will listen to other podcasts, and there's a lot of them that have very dubious, very toxic, quote unquote, very toxic messages. And yes, it is very chilling to know that this kind of podcast is available to everyone, including a child that's been left to their mom's iPad at like 10 years old. With that being said, I genuinely do think that the only thing that can regulate the podcast space kind of is the government, especially African governments, as has been mentioned before, waking up to the fact that this is new media with an actual impact on people's minds. And as such, instead of just thinking of media as TV and radio and that's it, they should think about podcasts and how to regulate them. They should make sure that the regulations governing TV and radio govern podcasts too, because there's some things I've heard in podcasts that if they were said on TV or on radio, they would cost people their life.
Fine, of course. Of course. Thank you so much for that, and Jerry. Now, I would also like to ask Aisha, and this is for you. I've heard people say things like, we don't always want to watch the news and see an expert talk and then the interviewer asking questions. That's like the stereotype. Okay, what do you think? I think this. Well, they don't want the professional point of view. They want people that can relate with them, which is okay. But then podcasts now came in, and then they're not just relating with your feelings now. They're now telling you things they do that they feel is right? And then they're expecting you to go ahead and do the same thing. So that brings the question, is podcast really necessary? Now, we understand that you don't always want to see expert talk, but is there no way that people can have a heart-to-heart, mate-to-mate, equal conversation without having to use all these vulgar words, advice that no one knows where it's coming from, things like that?
Podcast has its positive and its negative value. And then because of the negative, we can tend to push out podcast. Yeah. It's actually necessary to have podcast. But then, in as much as we learn on it, you can tend to accept what they say or you let it be. People are saying their truth. They are sharing their opinion. We need to regulate this body. So the fact that podcast can be necessary for those who share their true self and people get to learn from it, health-wise, education-wise, sex-wise, we need to have a regulation. That way, we can promote more about the podcasting. And it has actually moved from audio to visual.
Oh, yeah. So it's now broadcast.
Exactly. It's now broadcast. People get to see, and then they get interested and glued to whatever it is people are saying. You pay more attention when you see people talk. So I think the regulation is the best thing to do for us to continue and curb all those things that people are saying that are not necessary.
Okay, fantastic. Now, Noeline, Aisha mentioned that, the fact that we're seeing a lot of negative sides to the podcast doesn't mean that the positives do not exist. Do you know of any advantage that podcasts have? Noeline, are you there?
Yes, sure. Podcasts have. Yes, I'm there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, podcasts have their advantages. First, it's a platform for expression. So many people have come out to share their ideas, to express themselves. People have shared real life stories on podcasts. You'll find that you're not actually going through the worst situation because someone out there has come out to share their experiences or their situations. People have come out to share real life stories. People have shared educational stories. People have shared educational topics. You find yourself, you've created a community of just listeners listening to something very educative. And it's also builds a program for yourself. There is this podcast coming up at this time. I have to follow it up. So you have a routine of an activity that is actually beneficial and building you as a person. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. I would also like to ask Njeri if there's any other advantage you would like to add.
Oh, yeah, there is. Podcasts are a great teacher. because people don't want to listen to people who look like they're speaking down to them. The fact that podcasts are so relatable means that people are more open to learn, especially the educational type podcasts. And this has also kind of spilled into journalism, because most journalists, most media houses now have podcasts where the journalists kind of disseminate information in a way that is relatable, in a way that doesn't look boring. And I feel that, yeah, that is a huge advantage.
All right, thank you so much for that. And now it's time for us to go on a short break. And when we come back, we'll definitely be taking Twitter reactions to this very important conversation, which is podcasts and whether or not the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Do stay with us. Well, you're still watching Fafanua Africa. Thank you so much for staying with us on the show. Now, we have been talking about podcasts and the advent of it, the advantages and the disadvantages. And of course, I have my delectable guests who are helping me dissect the issue. Today, a podcast is defined by its ability to stream online or be downloaded for listening while offline, and is usually part of a series that listeners can subscribe to in order to receive information on future episodes. So trust me, it doesn't just stop at one episode, it keeps on going. A podcast can either be audio or video, like we said. It has become a vodcast or podcast, though the audio podcasts are a bit more popular and they can be found in different platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the likes. Well, that said, I still have my guest with me, Aisha Afonja, the project manager for Hikes Media, Nigeria. I also have Noeline Tracy Kabali, communications executive in Kampala, Uganda, and Njeri Gikonyo, a journalist in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you, ladies, for still being here. Now, we're still talking about podcasting in Africa, right? And I would like for us to look at it from another angle now. It has been noticed, or we have realized that podcasts most of the times, because we have a group of people who are of the same age range, right? People who think alike, who are young and want to express themselves. We see that a lot of times they now tend to go against cultural norms. And by that, I mean, some years ago, Nigerians would say they did not really born you well to come on live TV and say that virginity is not a flex. But these days, you know, it's like I said, people now believe that my truth has to be said. So a young girl who has parents will come online and say that your virginity doesn't mean anything, you know. So it now brings the question, is there a balance between podcasts, you know, people just opening their mouths and saying things, and the cultural norms that we are used to in Africa? You know, if it's the Western world, right? I'm not saying they don't have culture, but there are certain things you expect from the Western world. But when you come to Africa, the same Africa where they will use broom and slippers to flog you, and then you're saying things like that. So it brings that question, is there a balance between podcasts and cultural norms? Aisha, I would like for you to go first.
I would say we don't really have balance between podcast and cultural norms, because, you know, people tend to tag themselves as Gen Z, and that way they can get to do whatever it is they like without being cautioned. You know, they are the one who knows the technology, who knows how to use it well, and then they can do whatever it is they want. But they forget that we have this cultural value that we need to put to whatever it is we're going. Because, you know, our parents back in the days, you know, they beat you to learn things the right way.
Yeah.
Fine, even if their process sometimes may not really work in line, it might get you scared to like relating with them, but you have to put in cultural values to your guidelines to getting things right. Once you remember that you have this value, you tend to know what to do and how to do it right.
Fantastic. Okay, Noeline, do you want to say anything about it? Podcast versus cultural norms.
I think podcast is an advanced technology of what our culture was. Like in African settings, storytelling is part of us. We are storytellers as Africans. Culturally, we communicate through storytelling, we learn through stories. Now, the difference here comes in, well, in culture, when it comes to culture, we are a bit controlled. You know, there are these things you don't talk about in public. There are things you don't say. There are things you don't even think about them at a certain age. However, podcast now is more like the liberty of My cultures have put them aside. It's now time for me to be free and say whatever I want to say, or say everything that I feel should be said, or do everything that culture is refusing me to do. So podcasts are just giving us that platform to go away past the culture and be who we actually want to be.
Okay, great. Jerry, do you want to say something about that?
Actually, there is not that much. It's not a war of podcast, no Gen Z versus culture. Speaking as a Gen Z, I feel like podcasts have given most of my generation the kind of solace. How do I put this? Yes. As someone said, the kind of assurance that whatever it is they're going through, they're not going through it alone. Besides that, we have been raised in a very unique era where we have been exposed to technology for a long time. So some things that may look strange to the people older than us do not look strange at all to us. So there is usually that disconnect that comes in between there. And podcasts bring that to light. We can see where it is exactly that our values, our norms kind of clash, and see whether we can come to an understanding. So all in all, I think they can work as a good thing.
Okay. Now, looking at the advantages, Aisha, do you think that podcasts should be made a proper channel, right? Like when we're talking about mass media, talking about the TV, radio and all, do you think that podcasts should be elevated to that level, and then the regulations and the rules and everything that applies should apply? Because now is a question of, should podcasts really exist, looking at the advantages and the damages that they have caused? So should they be elevated to the level of the media generally, or should they just be discarded?
I feel they should be discarded. They shouldn't be turned to a proper channel, because everyone has their audience. So for those who have their audience, for podcasters, you know how they go about it: download, stream, and get information about podcasting. So, and for media agencies, they have professionals who handle it. Now, podcasts have actually gone wild, that people of different race have their channel to themselves. So I think it should be discarded.
Okay, great. Well, now it's time for us to see some reactions on social media. We're going to be checking out what the TWIPs have to say about podcasts, podcasters, and the advantages and the disadvantages. And I'll be reading from the screen now. Dave Wiener says, #podcasting is for places your eyes are doing other important things. Driving, walking, running, watching stuff. So basically he's saying that podcasting will keep your ears busy while your eyes are doing other important things. And I think that's why a lot of people are interested in podcasts, because you can multitask while listening to a podcast. You can be doing dishes and listening to podcasts and all. Now, Agba Podcaster says, mastery also requires a lot of passion. You can learn everything there is to know about a niche, but if you're not passionate about it, you always find someone who will have the upper hand. So I think it's talking about podcasting generally, that you have to master the craft, right? Know your audience. If not, you find someone who is better than you. Mark Asquith says, well, this will probably ruffle some feathers. At Danny Brown CA asks me about some of the challenges in the podcasting industry. I get on to gatekeepers, full context, and why I think all sides of the industry need to be mindful, not just walled gardens. And this is according to Mark Asquith. Well, those were the opinions of the TWIPs from social media regarding podcasting. And, like the first person says, that podcasting helps you do other things while listening to it as well. A lot of people these days tend to get tired of listening to music, so they just want to listen to something, and then the topics are usually so catchy. You see something like young marriage, and you see people who can resonate to it, or pressure for marriage, and then you see all these young ladies and young men trooping in to listen to what people are saying about it. Because the truth is, everybody wants someone else's opinion. Everybody wants people to make them feel better about their situation. So if you see a topic that resonates with you, you want to see what people are saying about it. And that's why some people will argue that podcasts are advantages. But what they now say in the podcast is the problem, right? Do you make the situation worse, or do you give advice that really shouldn't even be said in public, or even in your mind generally? But anyways, let's come back to our conversation. Now, Noeline, what do you think about podcasts being means of making livelihoods? I mean, we're seeing that podcast now is the new big thing, right? It is the new market where a lot of people can cash out. Once your podcast gets a certain amount of traction, certain number of views and listeners, then you start cashing out. I think that's one of the good sides of the podcast. So what's your opinion?
I think when we come to podcasts, like the new media itself, we need to learn how to monetize this kind of media. So there are people, actually podcasters, that have a lot of numbers because their topics are very catchy. They speak to the soul. They speak to an individual. Even when they have so many other people out there listening, you as an individual, you're touched by those podcasts, and they are collecting numbers. They are collecting information. So when we monetize this, someone knows I'm not only sharing information, but I'm also benefiting back through the ads, through the shout outs, all those things that come through for the monetization of media. So, well, I think it would be good that when we tell podcasters that we are going to monetize this business, it's not just a business. So what you are sending out there, you should have it at the back of your mind that I need to attract listeners. I need to attract people who are going to like what I do and keep sharing it and move it and take it to so many places. I can get people that can come and put ads, or people that would want to market their businesses or their brands. And also that way, you know that what you're sending out represents a particular brand. So you're not going against to just speak anyhow or any uncensored information. So you, as you're podcasting, you're sharing your views, your ideas, or whatever you think, at the back of the mind, you're also representing a particular brand.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Now, Njeri, what would you say about some podcasters? Because, I mean, looking at how a lot of people now know to monetize these things, right? So sometimes, let's be honest, we see that some podcasters deliberately say some things on air to drum up controversy so that they can get more views and in turn get paid, right? So what do you think about that? People just deliberately saying or doing things on air. I mean, this is not news. We see a lot of celebrities doing it, a lot of people creating controversy so that they can trend more, to somehow maybe make their market better, sell better, and make more money. So what is your opinion on that?
My opinion is that no publicity is bad publicity. And if anyone has worked in either the media or advertising space, they'll know this to be a fact. Actually, in today's news, there is a YouTuber that has admitted to crashing a plane for views. Crashing a plane, my goodness. And I think that also blends into podcasts, the ones that say intentionally triggering things to get people to comment, share, and like their podcast. And engagement is engagement. The search engine really does not care what has brought it, what kind of content has brought the podcast to it. As long as it's there, it's there. It is unfortunate that it is the world we live in, but that is how it works. However, with regulations, I feel like that bad publicity cannot be wished away no matter how badly we want it to be, but it can be regulated if the right bodies pay attention.
Okay, thank you for that, Njeri. Noeline, do you want to say something about it? Podcasters deliberately bringing up issues, controversial issues, just to trend.
Yeah, I'd like to add to my colleague, like the world we are in has showed that bad news is actually good news. So the bad things you put out there are the ones that are going to make you trend. So everyone wants to trend. Everyone wants to jump onto what makes them trend. Well, it's not a good way of pushing our motive, our podcasting, and everything that we do. Again, it's what is making people grow big. So as society, we just need to sit back and think, where are we forcing the bad things to be the good news? So let's think back and see that someone can trend for talking about education. Someone can trend for talking about you should be a virgin. So, but people are trending because they think virginity is not necessary. So as society, we need to speak more and show that we don't actually need the bad news to train. So everyone, all podcasters are jumping up on what is actually going to make them money. If the bad news is what it will make them money, then they'll definitely jump onto that.
Right. When you said this, before I ask Aisha what her own opinion is, I remember one on a podcast that I was watching. I think it also went viral here in Nigeria, where a lady said something about her boyfriend that I honestly cannot say on air. And I'm sure a lot of people saw that, something that sparked up a lot of controversy. And people were asking, did she say it because she just wanted to trend, or is it really happening, right? It was a very bizarre thing to say. But then again, it reminds me of the fact that people will say or do anything on air or online just to trend, right? So Aisha, what's your opinion on that?
Well, controversies these days is the hot cake. Everybody wants to be the face of all the social media. They want to trend and they want to make money off it. But they forget that these things are actually affecting some people. There are some people that whatever it is they see online, it is true. Even if you have to fake it.
Yeah, they don't have filter.
They don't have filter at all. So these things are the things that affect a whole lot of people. So controversies, when you're making controversies, you need to be careful. In as much as we don't really have a regulation or regulatory body guiding podcasters now, they should think about the future. People who are watching it without guidelines.
And that's the thing. So the internet never forgets, right? You say something today and in the next 5 years, you're running for president and that thing you said on Twitter resurfaces, right? And I would also like to talk about the impact that social media plays on podcasts and people generally, right? I'm of the opinion, and a lot of people as well, that social media somehow promotes some of these negativities in a way, and that is to say that there's some things that are said or done or filmed on social media that shouldn't exactly get as much traction, but somehow the algorithm keeps pushing it, right? Good things, good interviews and all, you will try. You can even promote your post from today till next year. You will get like 1,000 views highest. Or you see something that has maybe vulgar languages and even a podcast where people are not, it's not like they're making sense or they're not saying anything reasonable, but the way they're dressed, oh my God, so revealing, right? And so those are the kind of things that social media algorithm sees and deems fit to push out. So the question is social media also promoting this this negativity, from the side of social media, where you're seeing that this thing doesn't make sense? Like you literally wake up and see someone say something really inappropriate online, and in your mind you're like, what is this? And you go offline and you come back in the evening and that thing has gotten like 1 million views and you're wondering, who is watching this? Why are they even watching it? So do you think that social media also plays a part in promoting the negativity?
Yes, they have a lot of contribution to saying negative stuff like that. When you put in music that you didn't pay for on this platform, they will tell you that you're wrong for using this particular music.
Yeah.
So they should also apply same thing to podcasters. You don't push out things. When you get to detect things that are not supposed to be said on social media, you take it down. Right. But then they believe that, okay, you already have 1 million views. Someone who come across that particular content would want, for this to have 1 million views, what is this person talking about?
Exactly.
Regardless of it being positively good for that person or negative. So they need to work on, they're actually one of the major problems that we have.
Okay, very well said. Now, Noeline, very quickly, what do you think about social media pushing that propaganda?
Social media is currently the new good evil. It's the place where you're going to find everything, good or bad. It's a place that is very addictive. It's a place where you're going to put something and everyone will see. So even when we have the podcasting apps, you find that they give us that option of sharing because people will get these things from social media. So once we share them, that's when they'll get more traction, they'll get more numbers, they'll get more viewers, more listeners. We cannot share out what we are podcasting if we do not put it on social media. So I feel like without social media, then we have no podcasts. So podcasts are incorporated into the social media platforms, and every podcaster should go out there. While you're growing your podcast platform, you also have to grow your social media platform.
Right. Okay, thank you so much for that. And finally, Jerry, do you want to say something about it?
Yes, social media is a mirror of society. There is nothing that is, social media is not a sentient entity. It does not generate things by itself. So the fact that it pushes controversial content means that a lot of people have interacted with said controversial content and liked it. That is not the ideal way to live, but that is how things are. With that being said, I think this kind of boils down to a more individual perspective. Like, you'll have to control yourself and your mind, because an algorithm is basically informed by things that you search, And yes, there will give the fact that sometimes curiosity will lead you to see exactly what it is everyone is talking about, but we cannot expect to think as a hive mind, as society, or as humanity. So we have to think for ourselves and put our own boundaries so that, we can't get affected by everything that is being thrown our way.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I really want to use this opportunity to thank you all for being amazing guests and helping me discuss this very very pivotal issue. And like Noeline said, this is social media is now the good evil, and the major bone of contention here is podcast. And thankfully, you all have been able to create a balance between the positives and the negatives. And hopefully, the youths out there would also see that social media and the podcast should not define their agenda, should not create a narrative, sell a certain narrative to them. And this is the point where I would say that you need to hold on tight to your principles, hold on tight to what you believe, because the things that people are saying out there, trust me, if you're not careful, the level of vulnerability that especially Africa is operating on, you will definitely fall for it. And, like the wise people would always say, if you don't stand for one thing, you will fall for any and everything. But once again, thank you so much, Aisha Fonja, joining me in the studio, project manager, Hacks Media Nigeria. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You look amazing, by the way.
Thank you. You too.
All right, and thanks a lot to Noeline Tracy Kabale, communication executive from Kampala, Uganda. Thank you for taking time to join me on my show.
Thank you for having me too. It's been a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. And finally, last but not the least, Njeri Gikonyo, the journalist in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you so much for giving your profound opinions on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. All right, that said, we have some short but very profound expressions by African icons that pertain to podcasts and generally expressions in recent times. So do take a look. Okay, you're free to go. Young people love podcasts for 3 reasons. These are convenience, choice, and inclusion. A United Nations Children's Fund report shows that South Africa especially has 72% of young people from the age of 15 to 24 who own smartphones. Now, African youths listen to podcasts because they choose what shows to listen to, as well as their time to listen. Podcasts are becoming popular in Africa because of the inclusion of diverse voices. This reflects listeners' interests more than the traditional views aired on mainstream radio. But the question remains, what is the extent of damage that should be anticipated in the next few years? Well, it's been an amazing 1 hour packed program, and thanks to all our guests for that. Join us again next week for another exciting and informative episode of Fafanua Africa. Till then, I'm Blessings for Sugu.